everyone. I'm waiting a little bit while people are entering into the room. But thanks a lot for joining this new session of the Media Plurality RPN of the CEPR. We are very glad to have you today, and we are very glad to have as a speaker Sophie Hatt, who is a professor of economics at the ENS Lyon. Sophie has a huge number of papers now on media economics, on social media, that you might probably know. Today, she's going to present us something that I guess I can present as novel work on connecting the unconnected, Facebook access and female political representation in Sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm really looking forward to it because I guess most of the social media work that we have as of today is focusing on like Western democracies, rich countries. And here is something that is looking at this from both the political economy point of view and also the development economics point of view. I would like also to give a huge thanks to Paula Tavares, who accepted to discuss this work. Paula Tavares, she works at the World Bank. She's an international lawyer with and also a gender expert, and she has worked a lot on all these gender issues at the World Bank over the past few years. So I guess she will have the perfect policymaker point of view to give her opinion on what Sophie did and also the main findings and perhaps the lessons that can be drawn from it for policymakers and the World Bank. So yes, let's start as usual. Sophie's going to start and give a talk for like 30 to 45 minutes. And then we will have Paula making a discussion. And then, you know, the floor will be open for question. You can always ask a question in a written form in the chat. But if you want to ask your question directly, you will also have this opportunity. And together with Felipe Loritzen, that now you know, who organized this webinar with me, we will be more than glad to moderate the discussions. And thanks to Jamila from CEPR for helping us setting up this seminar series. So Sophie, thanks again for accepting to participate, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen now. Up. And wait. Sorry. Okay, can you see it well? You can see the slides, right? Yes, okay. Great. Thank you very much, Julia, for the very nice introduction and mostly for the very kind invitation. I'm very, very glad that this project gets the chance to get presented in this super high quality webinar full of the media crowd and also with this policy perspective. So thank you very much, Julia. Thank you very much, Felipe, for everything, organizing everything so nicely. And a big thank to Paula, who agreed to provide a discussion to this paper. So indeed, the title of this paper is Connecting the Unconnected Access to Facebook and Female Political Representation in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this is a joint work with Jordan Loper, who is a researcher at University Clermont-Auvergne and the CERDI, and with Thomas Taylor, who is currently a PhD student at the European University Institute. So, and yeah, basically, as the title emphasizes, in this paper, we dig into these effects that granting broader access to internet and in particular to Facebook can have on female political representation in the context of Sub-Saharan Africa. So, as a broad motivation for this project, there is this observation that digital media, and particularly social media, basically provide this groundbreaking platform for disseminating content, for running campaigns, for topics that were once marginalized. So in politics, we know this already. To lower the cost of mobilization, and we know this from the seminal paper by Manacor and Tesei. It lowered the cost of political communication, and politicians use that strategically. This is very striking in the work of Pessone and co-authors on Brazil. It reduced the cost to access information, and particularly in these environments where the traditional media landscape is actually much controlled. And that in turn affects both the established actors, but also the traditionally underrepresented populations. So we basically focus on one such topics, which is female political representation, and building on the idea that social media campaigns, initiatives by women activists, female role model on social media can actually help empowering women and creating this more this larger gender parity in political representation. And all of this we know is important. I mean, above and beyond the relevance of this question for just, grounding access to the representation of this big group of like that represent half of the population, women in the society. We also know as economists that this is crucial to shape policy and economic outcomes, building on this very rich literature since the seminal work of Esther Duflo. So this very rich literature showing the impact of female political leadership. In this paper, we focus on the Sub-Saharan African context where underrepresentation of women in leading political positions is very striking. So you're going to see in sample, it's 1 out of 10 constituencies that elect a female MP, a female member of parliament. We even have countries where it's less than 10% of the seats that are held by women in national parliaments. There is also high level of restrictions on women on other sectors of the societies, and importantly, the traditional media landscape is much controlled in most of the cases. We have countries like Nigeria, like Tanzania, like Uganda, where the freedom of the press is really, really low. Also, very interestingly, that goes with gender discrimination in the media landscape. So there are missing women in the news. Women, we know from the work of people like Kasova that these women, they rarely appear for some stories, like stories that have to do with the economy. Female politicians are also less visible, and there are missing women in the newsroom. It's very much male dominated. So in this paper, we study a disruptive shock, which started in the mid-2014 and boosted access to internet and social media, especially Facebook, which is a zero rating policy that it had different names over time. So we're going to call it Free Basics. It's one of the names that it had, and it's the name that it had for the longer time period. So what is Free Basics? So it's partnerships between Facebook, this leading social media platform, especially in low-income countries, that partner with local mobile operators. And these partnerships offer the possibility for SIM card owners in the countries in which these mobile operators operate to have access to, for free, for no additional data cost, to have access to a light version of the internet that is very much centered on Facebook. And Facebook advertised that it was a big success, that they actually gained lots of users thanks to this partnerships. And this is also a success that we document in this paper. Last piece that is important to have in mind, so about the context, internet data is actually unaffordable for the majority of the population in this country. So if you look at Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, it's virtually the most of the population, close to all the population is covered by mobile broadband internet. And there is also a huge use gap. So it's only half of the population that uses the internet. And the reason why is because the price is just prohibitive, this internet data price. So starting from there, and before I show you what we do, what we find, what do we expect? So I guess it's very clear for everybody that the expected effect of Facebook's Free Basics on the election of female MPs and the political representation of females is actually highly ambiguous. And crucially, that's going to depend on a number of factors that this paper is touching. One is the size of the connectivity shock. So first of all, we have to know whether indeed Facebook's Free Basics connected lots of people, large share of population to the platform. Second, it's very much going to depend on the structure of online social networks. So if connecting people is connecting people to conservative filter bubbles or echo chambers, we expect a very different effect than if actually Free Basics is connecting people to more diverse, more progressive, more gender egalitarian environments. On top of that, so the overall effect is going to depend on voters' response and whether voters indeed demand more democratic renewal, more female leaders when they've been exposed to Facebook's Free Basics. That's going to depend on the availability of female politicians on the supply side, and also on the behavior of political parties as gatekeepers or delegated monitors in this game. So this is this paper in one slide. So the question we ask is whether the arrival of more accessible internet and social media disrupted deeply rooted gender imbalance in the political representation in Sub-Saharan Africa. And to answer this question, we leverage novel data, so the data that we've built on the staggered introduction of Facebook's Free Basics at the mobile operator level and over time, which allows us to get this causal identification of the effects of Free Basics in a modern definitive setting, where we're going to have multiple countries, and within country variation in the locations that are exposed to Free Basics or not, depending on who are the mobile operators that signed a partnership and where they are located in the country. So equipped with that, we first document the connectivity shock. We document that social media usage increased in the locations with Facebook Free Basics as compared to similar locations, but without Free Basics. And we actually document that it started shortly after its introduction, and that the effect was large, where after 6 years of exposure, it more than doubled the use of social media. We also show, and that's the core of the paper, the effect of this connectivity shock on elections. And we document an increase in the election of female MPs that are endorsed by established parties, and only after one election. So in the short run, we don't observe any effect on the election of female MPs. It's only after one election, so during the second election, that we start to observe effects, which suggest that there is learning in the process during the electoral process. We also show, I'm going to show you that social users in the region exhibit more gender egalitarian attitudes, both in general, but also when it comes to politics, which may be a little bit, I think it's one of the surprising and of the interesting additional results of this paper, and something that we know more from other papers in the literature, and that is also revealed here, is that there is also higher demand for democratic renewal with these individuals as compared to similar individuals. So all of this emphasize that there seems to be this higher demand for this more egalitarian political class that goes with the use of social media. And lastly, we emphasize that this is very much driven by the structure of online social networks to which the users are connected. Very selected literature with a very clear selection bias for the media crowd. First of all, we build and we contribute to this very rich literature showing the impacts of internet and social media on political attitudes and electoral outcomes. This literature is huge. I'm going to focus here on the context that is closest to us. So in fragile democracies or autocratic regimes, where actually it has been shown that it goes with increased political engagement, with more government disapproval, with more political mobilization, protest, and also conflict. So in this context, our contribution is that to show that the introduction of Facebook through basically had significant consequences on the electoral performances of established actors, because again, I'm going to show you that everything is going through the major parties, the parliamentary parties, parties that were already in the parliament before, in the election before. And we also build on this literature showing that parties select candidates based on their expected popularity to show that higher demand for this more egalitarian political representation among social media users provided this fertile ground for a greater election of female MPs. Second, there are two main perspectives in the literature on social media. One that exacerbates the presence of echo chambers, filter bubbles, and with important implications in politics. And another that also show that individuals can actually get exposed to a broad range of political viewpoints than on traditional media or than on face-to-face personal interactions, for instance, like it was emphasized in the seminal paper by Gensko and Shapiro in 2011. So all this shows this complexity of social media's role in shaping political discourse, and underscores the importance of getting more on its effects in diverse political and technological environments. And this is where we also want to contribute to this literature. So I'm going to show you the data that we use in this paper. So in this paper, we focus on Sub-Saharan Africa, 17 countries that are in our sample because they share the same electoral system. So it's single-member constituencies and first-past-the-post voting, meaning that we are going to analyze the electoral outcomes for races in which we have a number of candidates, and the candidate that is going to be elected is the one that received the most votes in a one-round voting system. The unit of observation is a race, so it's a constituency times election year observation, and we collected huge data for this. Both based on existing archives, like CLIA, like the website of Adamka, but also, especially for the most recent elections, we had to go through Electoral Commission websites to get the information. So at the end of the day, we have a little bit less than 9,000 races that are occurring there in a little bit more than 2,000 distinct constituencies, okay, over the past 2 decades in our 17 countries. And we exploit information on the identity of the winner, the presence on the ballot of different types of candidates, and also the vote shares. And we focus a lot on gender. So when we didn't have this information, so for some elections we have it, for some we don't, and then we had to predict it based on the first name of the candidates. And we also use information on party affiliation and political experience. A first motivating summary stat that I want to show you is this one. So in sample, the races in which a woman was elected as MP, it's 11%, okay? And in those races, you see that there is more than half of the races in which there is not at least one woman on the ballot. So it's very clear why partly women do not get elected that frequently. And even when we focus on those races in which there is at least one woman on the ballot, it's still in only 24% of the cases that a woman gets elected in this constituency. Now, I told you that we created data to document the staggered rollout of free basics. So we do this by, so first of all, we measure free basics coverage at cell level of 1 kilometer times 1 kilometer and year by year. We do this by collecting individual information on each partnerships between Facebook and the operating mobile companies in the region, and we map the presence of free basics thanks to the coordinates of the mobile phone towers of this mobile operator. And then we cross this with fine-grained information on the population, which allows us to estimate the share of population covered by free basics at cell year level that then we aggregate at the constituency year level for most of the papers. We also had to geolocate the constituency boundaries, which was kind of it was some work, but equipped with this, then we are able to observe this staggered rollout of this technology, and this is one of the contributions of this paper as well. So here I'm showing you two maps a couple of years after the introduction of the first partnerships, and at the end of the period that we cover. And basically what you see is that in the technology was adopted in lots of places. And very importantly, what we see is that population that is covered by Facebook's free basics is very large. So you have places that, a few places that never adopted Facebook's free basics. We're going to use the fact that not all constituencies started to be covered at the same time. But what we see is that in the first election, when a constituency is covered by Facebook's free basics, it's the median constituency is covered at 84% of this population. And in the second election, it's virtually 100% of the constituency population that is covered by the treatment. So we're going to use a binary treatment in baseline just for this reason that the first order type of variation that we have here is binary. Before I show you the core of this paper, let me show you the connectivity shock. So we use Afrobarometer survey data from 2014 to 2021 over the same set of countries, which allows us to exploit variation in the response of more than 60,000 respondents and focus on and we explain their online behaviors in terms of using social media as a source of information, using internet as a source of information, but also using internet frequently, owning a mobile phone, or just having heard about social media. How do we do this? So we estimate this equation where we regress online behavior that is equal to 1 if respondent uses, for instance, social media for information on free basics, that's going to be equal to 1 if respondent is actually covered by free basics operator at time t. And we're going to include lots of controls. So we control for age, gender, primary education completion, rural location, religion. We are also going to include mutually exclusive dummies for 3G, 4G coverage and 2G coverage, and not free basics to just compare the effects. And we are going to include also at the local level, nighttime light to control for proxy for economic development, but also the presence of public facilities in the enumeration area, as well as country year fixed effects. Okay, so in this context, so we're comparing individuals covered by free basics with similar individuals not covered by free basics, we actually see that the social media usage from column 1 increases by close to 5 percentage points. You also see that this is something that we observe along the different outcome variables that we consider. And we also see that, I think it's very interesting that for similar individuals that have access to 3G, 4G, but not free basics, the effect is unprecisely estimated, but the coefficient is like it's just divided by 2. Okay, so it's really not the same order of magnitude. Over time, this estimated connectivity shock, if we actually look at the effect by duration of free basics coverage in years, we actually see that this quasi-linear relationship where after 3 years, it's already an increase of social media use by something like a third, and after 6 years, it's more than double, it's plus 124%, the use of social media for getting news. You may wonder who is actually affected by our treatment, and the part of the answer is in this table. We actually see that the effect is really like across the board. So by splitting our sample according to primary education completion or not, people young or older, male, female, people from urban versus rural places, etc. We see that everybody's affected positively, significantly, and quite largely. And I think very interestingly, we see that this includes those that are less likely to use social media. So we have this effect on people without primary education completed, where we have this effect on older people, we have this effect on females, we have this positive effects on people living in rural places, etc. Now, what's the effect of Facebook Free Basics on the election of female MP? We want to estimate this relationship where that is shown in this equation, where Y is alternatively whether the winner of this race is a woman, or what's the vote share of the women or the first ranked women, well, and what's the presence on the ballot of women, over again this variable Free Basics that is set to 1 if constituency J is covered by Free Basics in a given election year. And we also, of course, want to control for slow-moving characteristics at the constituency level. We can control in this context for, we can include country election year fixed effects. And we will also control for population density and nighttime light at the constituency year level. And in this case, we're going to cluster standard errors using the two-way clustering at the constituency and the country year, the two dimensions of the treatment. And again, we're going to use this very nice feature of the Tiger rollout of Free Basics that allows us to use the panel dimension, okay, to control for at local level with the inclusion of the constituency fixed effects, controlling for culture, for ethnic, for ethnicity, for religion, at the country election year level, controlling for macro differences in terms of institutions, fairness of election, control over the media landscape overall. So, of course, this is a standard staggered diff in diff, where we face the standard staggered diff in diff concern of potential treatment heterogeneity. So we are going to use the local projection approach to diff in diff to estimate this Free Basics effect, meaning that we're going to be in a long difference. So comparing the electoral outcomes in a given election to a reference year, and using a clean control in the spirit of the stack approach. So we are doing this because this allows us to stay in the regression world, and this allows for lots of flexibility for measuring heterogeneous effects, for instance, in terms of the hypothesis we do on the variance covariance matrix, and because we have this very unbalanced panel of elections where countries have elections in different years. But I will also show you that we get very similar effect with alternative diff in diff estimators of the literature. This is the main baseline result of this paper. So you're seeing on this graph the point estimate and the confidence interval at each election relative to the entry of Free Basics in a constituency. So in -3, -2, you see that 2 elections before the entry of Free Basics, there is no significant differences between these constituencies that are going to be treated by Free Basics and the others. In the election 0, so it's the first election with Free Basics, again, nothing. And in the second election, so one election after the introduction of the technology in the second election, we get this positive 0.102 coefficient that is significant at the 5% level. So this is just the table that shows you what is behind this graph. And this shows that in the second parliamentary election with Facebook's Free Basics, it increases the likelihood with which female MP get elected. On average, it's 6 years after the introduction of Free Basics. So remember, it's when the connectivity effect is already relatively big. If we, to give order of magnitudes of this effect, this plus 10 percentage points, I think it's very useful to use the persuasion rate because it allows us to remember that we are in a context where the population that is left to be convinced by the message is actually huge. Remember, it's just 1 out of 10 constituencies that elect a female MP in samples. So the persuasion rate actually gets to something like 11%, which is in the range of similar studies in the literature. This is the graph that shows you what happens if we take other definitive estimators and the take-home message that we don't really observe very different. We don't really have very different conclusions from using these alternative estimators. Now, what happens when we, or how to interpret this effect that is that manifests only in the second election with free basics? For this, we first do this exercise where we look at the effect 1 year after the introduction of free basics, 2 years after, 3 years after, 4 years after, etc., etc. What you see is that in the first election with free basics, the effect, no matter what's the duration of exposure to free basics, the effect is nearly zero. So there is no heterogeneity according to this duration of exposure. On the contrary, in the second election, this is where the effect starts to manifest. We don't have much for those elections with just 5 years of exposure, which are also elections, very interesting, that had free basics just for a short period before the very first election. So I think it's all compatible with this idea that there was learning. For them, there was not much learning, actually. But for the other races, well, more precisely for the other constituencies that already had really this first election with free basics, in the second election, that's where we start to see the positive effect. We do a number of steps. So treatment dose, there is nothing really different from what I said, and that's not very surprising because again, the first order type of variation comes from whether you're covered by free basics or not. We check whether free basics is actually robust to controlling for the availability of local mobile internet, and this holds. We also check that free basics is not we are not detecting an effect that is mechanically driven by a longer exposure to mobile internet or to 3G, 4G. Okay, you may think that free basics comes afterwards, and so maybe we are just capturing the effect of some constituencies have access to mobile internet for a longer time period, and this is not what we observe. So it seems to be that, or we are providing evidence that this is really related to the entry of this technology that grants broader access to the internet and to Facebook in particular. We look at the effect on electoral competition and we don't see anything. So it's not that it affects systematically the number of candidates or candidates by party type or vote share fragmentation or fractionalization. The only thing that we see is that there is a negative effect on turnout in the second election with free basics. Now, what happens? So, where does this effect on the election of female come from? So, we look at the candidacy. So we do different things in the paper. I'm just going to show you one exercise here. So per constituency, we look at whether there is at least one candidate on the ballot for a given race. And we look at the presence of females and males separately. Okay, females in red. So we see on the left-hand side that in the first election with free basics, the presence of at least one female politician from a parliamentary party is not affected significantly by the presence of free basics. We also don't see anything on the women running as independent. There are really not many, actually. And we see this negative effect on the non-parliamentary party female candidates, and on the males, not much. On the second election with free basics, what we see is that these women endorsed by parliamentary party, there are more of these races with at least one candidate from a parliamentary party who is a woman. This is already pointing to the fact that we are seeing this effect also because there are more constituencies in which there is a woman endorsed by a big party that has these resources and the platforms and the networks that is going to project those women into elections. Now, if we look at our winner is a women outcome variable, main outcome variable through this paper, again, we see that pre-basics positively correlates with or even generate this positive effect on the victory of female candidates that are endorsed by parliamentary party, and not much for female candidates with even virtually zero effect for women endorsed by non-parliamentary parties or running as independents in the second election. For this table is now showing you exactly the same thing for men. So you see that males that are endorsed by a parliamentary party in the second election, they are negatively impacted, even though the effect is not precisely estimated. We also don't see anything for the non-parliamentary party and this men running as independent. And very interestingly, in the first election with free basics, we see a negative significant effect on the election of male candidates from a parliamentary party. So we dig into this effect and we zoom in on these races that saw a victory of a male candidate running with a parliamentary party. We do this both in the first election, for instance, in column 1, and in the second election. And now we look at the win margin. Okay, so what's the win margin of this successful male candidates running with a parliamentary party as compared to the runner-up? This is in column 1 for the first election, and you see this negative effect of pre-basics on the win margin of this male candidates running with a parliamentary party. And you also see that this goes with, this is driven by the reduction in the win margin of these male candidates running with a parliamentary party as compared to the best female. It already shows up in the first election, and it's there still in the second election with free basics, again suggesting that the effect actually started to show up in the first election, and again supporting this idea that there was some learning which led to the greater election of female in the second election. Here I'm just showing you that we look at the effect conditional on running. I'm going to skip this for the sake of this presentation and show you the aggregate effect. So is it basically parties? We see that everything is going through these major parties. So is it that these parties strategically endorse female candidates in some places and more male candidates in other places, which would actually lead to situations where the net effect is not really positive for female politicians? And that can be the case if there is shortage of female politicians, or if there is lower demand for female leaders in the non-treated, in the non-pre-basics constituency. So we use variation at the region admin 1 level, okay? And this time we look at the share of female party candidates that are elected at the party region level. And we regress this on the share of constituencies with free basics. And what we see in blue, so in the second election with free basics, we see this positive effect. So insignificant at the 10% level, meaning that in places, in regions where there are more constituencies that are covered by free basics, the share of women elected at party region level is actually increased. We do the same at region level. You see, number of observations not super large, but here you see how, again, the share of constituencies with free basics at the region level positively affect the share of female candidates elected again at the regional level. The effect is magnified when in fair elections and in places where freedom of the press is low, and that make the transition to the very last part that I'm going to present in a couple of minutes about the mechanism. So bear with me for a few slides, because I think we have very interesting stories to say in this mechanism part. So, of course, for the use of this app to generate such effect during elections, it means that something happened in the society. Okay, so we check this. We take this hypothesis seriously and check with our Afrobarometer survey data what is the attitudes of the respondents that declare that they are using social media. Okay, again, controlling for everything that I listed before. So comparing similar respondents, what is in the column 1, the likelihood with which they declare that they are in favor of equal chance for women in politics. And the effect is positive and significant. And the effect is estimated over, for data availability reason, is estimated over the 2014 to 18 period, which is the period before we have any second election with free basics. So it's not endogenous to the election, the more frequent election of women, and it's already materialized is in the society in this second election with free basics period. We also see that those social media users, they are less happy with their representatives. So they think more that MPs are corrupt, they trust less the parliament, they voted less in the last election, and they are very well aware in column 2 and 3 of the impact that social media has on informing people, and the impact that it can have on politics. We see similar effects when we look at gender norms outside politics, that social media users in this context, again, comparing comparable individuals, they exhibit more progressive gender norms. They are less into the fact that men should be prioritized in the labor market, or they think more that women should get granted equal land rights. And this is the very, very last part of this presentation. We conclude on this by looking at how this is ever possible. Okay, so our hypothesis is that for Facebook and Facebook's free basics to persuade people to either adopt this attitude that I just showed you and elect more females, it should have something to do with the blend of content that they are exposed to. So in our context, free basics, remember, is granting access to this leading social media platform, Facebook, and Facebook data, metadata, allows us to measure the relative frequency of friendship links on Facebook between every region pair in the world, or most of the region pair in the world. So we use this data to measure exposure to local content. So what's the share of the friends of a representative user in a given region that is connected? What is the share of the friends that are in the same region than this user? And so this is our first metric. And the second metric that we build is what's the share of friends of a representative user in a given region that are located in places with higher female political representation. Okay, and that allows us to test this channel of online transmission of norms regarding female political leadership. And what we find is the following. So looking at our first measure that captures local network concentration, so the share of Facebook friends in the same region, we basically find that for attitudes toward equal chance for women in politics, the social media premium is decreased for those people who have more friends in the same region. And remember that these regions are highly conservative, or at least highly egalitarian in terms of female representation. Okay, and this is driven. This is what you show in what you see in column 1 and 2, and in column 3 and 4, you see that this is driven by the constituencies that, or the individuals that are exposed to very concentrated networks locally. If we look at the same for but on the electoral outcome, so now the dependent variable is whether the winner is a woman, or in column 1 to 4, or whether the winner is a woman from a parliamentary party from column 5 to 8. We see the same thing, that there is this positive free basics premium in the election of women, or in the election of women from a parliamentary party, but this premium decreases with the share of Facebook friends in the same region, and this becomes very large for the fourth quartile of network local concentration. And again, if we do this exercise, but now not considering the share of friends in the same region, but the share of Facebook friends in countries that have higher women representation, we find that the social media premium exacerbates in those places with that where the representative Facebook user is connected more with friends in countries with higher women representation. This is driven by those places where the difference in women representation is actually higher. It's higher than a standard deviation, okay? And it's less the case when we consider places in which the difference in women representation is more negligible. And also, this is also present when we look at the effect on electing a female, or electing a female from a parliamentary party. The free basics positive premium magnifies or in the races where users are more connected to friends and to content that is produced from these higher women representation parts of the world. And again, this is driven by those places where the difference is significant. It's larger than a 1/3 deviation. So this is it for the presentation. We just documented that Free Basics, this leading zero rating policy led by Facebook, fuels connectivity and social media usage in the Sub-Saharan Africa. We show that there is a large positive effect on female political representation that is driven by established parties, the fact that these parties endorse more often these female politicians. And this is this manifests only after a first election in which males from these parties experience disappointing outcomes. We show that these effects during election reflects more egalitarian gender attitudes among social media users in the region, and higher demand for renewal of the political class, especially in this context of low freedom of the press and low female representation in politics overall. And crucially, we show that the effects depends on the extent to which online social networks connect people to, either like-minded contexts or a more diverse perspective, more progressive, and very likely more progressive gender norms. And all of this taken together, we think calls for a broader understanding of the interplay between digital media and norm transitions in other sectors of the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a great presentation, and like you are just on time. It was just perfect. So Paula, the floor is yours, and then we'll turn to discussion with all the participants.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Sophie, for the excellent presentation and the valuable paper. To all, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. I'm Paula Tavares, and we'll be delighted to serve as a policy discussant for the session, and really trying to look at some of the considerations from the paper on a topic intersecting social media, digital connectivity, gender equality, political representation. Big thanks to Media Plurality, CEPR, Felipe, Julia for the invitation, and again to the excellent work by Sophie. Just wanted to start by acknowledging the value of the research presented by Sophie and the co-authors, really highlighting the timeliness, both in the context of rapid digital transformation, both in Sub-Saharan Africa, the focus of the research, but globally, and really the pressing need to promote women's political representation leadership. All of this not only for reasons of equality itself, but the implications are broader outcomes for all, and the implications that some of these impacts may have on broader gender equality. This is particularly true in Sub-Saharan Africa, the focus of the study, where I've been working extensively for the last 10 years, and where critical gaps remain in promoting gender equality, both in terms of the legal context, which is a big part of the work that we do, so looking at restrictive formal norms, but also very traditional gender norms, which is part of what the study also looks at and contributes to illuminating potential for change, right? A little bit of kind of framing the discussion in broader global trends. We know that gender parity in political representation remains a challenge globally. This was highlighted by Sophie in her presentation. Women remain underrepresented in political leadership worldwide, despite efforts everywhere, like decades of legal reform, institutional reforms in terms of promoting and advancing gender equality, which is one of the aspects that I focus on extensively. It's one of the areas where we've progressed less, and so research that can shed light on potential for advances is very welcome. We know that the underrepresentation in politics is due to several factors. There are legal restrictions, as I mentioned, institutional, economic, social, economic, and cultural barriers. But one of the largest ones, and this is the one I think the research really focuses on, is really the gender norms and the impacts, the pervasive impacts of that. And so seeing the role of digital access, connectivity, social media as an evolving factor, relatively new, but evolving factor that deserves attention in policy debates is critical, and seeing the potential that it has to circumvent some of these historical obstacles. So again, the research was very well presented and thoroughly, really looking at the causal relationship between connectivity, social media through Facebook and Free Basics, and female representation in politics in Sub-Saharan Africa. And some of the key findings that the impact that the study finds is driven by greater demand for female leaders, but also shifts in gender norms, the increased political visibility for women, again, with stronger effects observed in regions with limited press freedom, traditional gender norms, which really emphasizes the transformative potential of digital platforms connectivity. Some of the empirical findings that were mentioned, right? The increase and the impact in female representation, and really increasing the election of female politicians, with effects being more prominent in the second election after rollout, connected to what we observe in other areas as well, which has to do with the time it takes often for some of the changes to take effect, especially when thinking of shifts in gender norms and the impacts around that. Some of the mechanisms that were highlighted, right? So greater demand for female leaders due to shifts in societal attitudes influenced by exposure to progressive gender norms through connectivity. We see this, more broadly in other areas as well, with changes to gender norms through just exposure to other experiences, to examples, and promoting the connection between populations in different countries is something that we focused on because of these effects. And so it's good to see this highlighted really in the research as well. Also the enhanced visibility, of course, and the political engagement opportunities for female candidates. This is something that is seen as a constraint often for increased political representation. Really seeing social media as an equalizer to some extent, right? So helping bypass traditional media barriers that often exclude or underrepresent women. The exposure to progressive gender norms. And so again, a pathway through increased connectivity that correlates with more favorable attitudes toward female leadership and increased representation. And then, you know, the fact that social media really facilitates outreach and political engagement overall. Potentially some considerations overall. The paper, you know, it complements global research on digital inclusion, political participation, really looking at bridging, you know, digital and gender gaps. It aligns with some of the research that I've done on gender and political representation, particularly the role of institutional barriers, media biases in shaping the success or the increase in women's political participation. And it really highlights a critical point that access to information is to some extent power, right? And translates and can translate into power, and how social media not only informs, but can also reshape and help reshape societal norms, especially around female leadership, right? This is done by acting as a catalyst for gender norm transformation, especially in more restrictive environments, and show the importance of digital access or the potential for digital access as a tool for gender inclusive participation, right? Especially in certain contexts where traditional media is not favorable or is restrictive or biased. We know, for example, that women's political representation is not just about electoral systems, but tied to gender norms, economic barriers, social perceptions, and that gender norms heavily influence women's ability to enter and succeed in politics. And some of the studies, including some of the ones that we've done in partnership with other organizations, show really that, you know, voter bias against women remains significant, particularly in regions where patriarchal norms dominate, that traditional media coverage often reinforces gendered narratives and focusing on female candidates' personal lives rather than their policies, and that social media has the potential to shift attitudes. And this is important to note that often it's conditioned or to some extent connected to women fully engaging with digital platforms. So overall, you know, access to information being an important tool to dismantling some of these barriers and really suggesting that the exposure to social media can foster more gender progressive attitudes. This aligns with research showing that greater visibility of women in leadership roles leads to broader acceptance of female political participation as well. Again, important to recognize that digital access itself is gendered, and there are often greater risks to women using social media, right? And so this is research that has been done, and the data, you know, shows that women are likely overall to have access to, you know, mobile technology, to afford internet access, or be literate in terms of digital content. So it might limit the potential of some of these tools, but also shows how tools such as, you know, free basics can circumvent and can offer greater access in some of these contexts. It's also important to note, and these are some of my considerations, that, you know, the risks of social media and online platforms, particularly for women with online violence and harassment, right? And so really thinking about how, for digital tools to be true enablers of political empowerment and greater gender equality, it's also important to take into account and address these structural barriers to women's digital access. So maybe some other considerations, and there's a clear link established by the study between Facebook access, connectivity, and female representation, and be important to look at other concurrent factors, broader democratization efforts that could play a role and influence these outcomes. I know some of these were obviously considered in the paper. Another consideration that would be interesting to look at, and it's of course beyond the scope of this specific work, but whether there's a sustainability of impact in the findings, right? Is the effect sustained across multiple electoral cycles, or is this more an initial primary surge, particularly potentially linked to novelty, or some of the considerations that were made around the how the changes were observed, right? Also looking at, beyond Facebook, other digital platforms that can influence gender norms and political engagement. So we know that other platforms such as WhatsApp are extensively used, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa, and also have shown in other countries, the case of Brazil, where I'm originally from, that had huge implications in elections in past years. And so, how other potential, how their platforms have potentially confirmed the same types of observations, right? And so just some food for thought for maybe future endeavors. And really, I guess the considerations around the risks really of connectivity and social media especially for women, right? And we, the power and the empowerment aspect of social media is certainly shown by this work and other evidence. But again, the fact that it has also been shown to expose particularly women to online harassment, disinformation, violence. And so really looking at how this might affect the potential positive impacts of social media on females' political representation. How might these risks be mitigated to sustain the positive effects? And, how can we ensure that increased online visibility and exposure does not lead to greater violence and potentially negative impacts for women, for gender equality, and particularly for women in politics. So I think these are some of the considerations, really looking at, social media being a powerful tool, reinforcing global trends, showing that digital access is an important avenue for, access to information, for shifting norms, for having implications more broadly. The argument for integrating potentially digital strategies into gender equality policies in politics, which I've seen already. And really the fact that, potentially some more information can be important on how digital access shapes longer term leadership trajectories for women, and whether some of the trends hold in light of potential misuse of social media, disinformation, violence, etc. And then critical to consider in parallel other mechanisms to support women's political representation, right? So combining social media interventions, of course, with with other measures that have been important in ensuring that the transformation of gender norms, which is a key avenue for the impacts of the work here, but also dismantling structural barriers through other avenues. I think that was about it, but really, thanking the authors for the valuable, findings that really add significantly to the work and the discussions around improving gender equality, women's political participation, and particularly through, its transformative impact in shifting gender norms, which aligns very well with a lot of the work that we've been doing. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot, Paula, for a great discussion. Perhaps, Sophie, you want to answer first to some of the points that were raised, and then we open the floor to more questions?
Yes, thank you, Julia, and thank you very much, Paula, for the very insightful discussion. So I would say that I very much agree with with everything that has been said by Paula. And just to address a few points that were raised by Paula. First, I would say that there was this idea that women. I mean, this is very relevant to think about the access of women to this technology and understand both the benefits and the risks. I very much agree with that. So what we see in this data, and what is also shown in many other studies, is indeed this lower access to mobile technology for women that, as you said, might limit the potential of these tools. So regarding this, I think that the fact that we find that women are affected. So they are indeed among the people that benefits from the policy. They use more online resources, and they use more social media is I think very interesting. And maybe to further talk about that, so we see this effect that is touching even the women that actually we know are less likely to use the social media platforms anyway. It also speaks to the fact that for men, we also see that they are gaining access to, or broader access to social media. And when we look at the attitudes, I think it's also interesting to see that both female and male respondents declare that they have more favorable attitudes towards female. So what we see is really like that. Indeed, the technology is affecting women, but it's also affecting men. And men actually respond in terms of attitudes also more favorably to this idea of more gender equal political representation, which for us was actually quite a surprise. On the second point that you, or maybe linked to this, I agree that it would be nice to address questions related to harassment. And for this, I mean, we don't really have the right empirical setting to do this, but with individual data, showing how male and women behave in this context and in this particular country, and with this broader access to the platform to the population, I think it would be indeed super interesting to see how this risk related to connectivity for women gets affected. And I don't know, maybe regarding what we do, I think it would be nice to see also how that is monitored by the political parties. And yeah, I agree that it would be very interesting to dig into the effect of the technology through multiple electoral cycles, because here we are showing the effect only for 2 electoral cycles, but of course it opens the questions of what's happening next. And I think it would be nice to do that, and to also confirm or compare what we obtain when we dig into other social media platforms, even though, I don't think we have any elements that point to the fact that we would really expect very different results, as long as we compare environments in which the traditional media landscape is controlled, in which the representation of female is particularly imbalanced, etc., etc.
Okay, so thanks a lot. So perhaps, Felipe, I will let you monitor the discussion, but I will take the first question anyway, and then I will give the. I had many questions, and I really have to say these are not like technical questions in a sense, because I really buy your findings and everything is super carefully done. I learned a lot, even on this free basics stuff of Facebook. Perhaps I should have known, but I did not. And I think you already do a lot in the paper, in the sense perhaps a little bit too much trying to explain, what is happening. And at the end of the day, I have like two questions. One is, what if you were to have one bullet point, what would be your final explanation of why it took 6 years rather than 3? Like whether this is learning by citizens, by candidates, by parties, and okay, perhaps like the different effects are a little bit, but I would like to have like what would be the main explanation according to you. And in fact, I have 3 questions. The second question is whether this is a Facebook effect. So Paula was talking about WhatsApp, which is also Meta, but whether this is a social media effect or a network effect. And if it is network effect, could we have imagined something like similar by creating network of persons, but like not online, like doing some randomized experiments, or whether this is a media effect. You have some paper on the internet. You mentioned in your presentation Gensko and others, but on the degree of segregation online. So whether this comes from so whether social media really matters, or this is the more matter as a way to spread a message, but we don't care about the technology. And the last thing that I don't know whether you can answer it with your data, but just to get your thought, do you think this is just about women, or would that work also for other minorities? So I always have a hard time talking about minorities when it turns to women, but you know what I mean. Minorities in people that are underrepresented in politics.
Yeah, thank you very much for these 3 very cool questions. So on the first one, why is it that it took 6 years rather than 3? Our answer to this question is that it just took one election, actually. So what we find, so it happens that, and I'm mentioning these 6 years because then because we also see that after 6 years, the effect in terms of connectivity is already super large. But what we think is happening, and based on this heterogeneity analysis that we do based on the duration of exposure to free basics, is that it's really about the fact that this is the second election, more than 6 or 3 or so. It just happens that in our sample, the second election is it's between 5 to 8 years of exposure to free basics, and in most of the cases, or on average, it's 6 years. But as we don't detect any other heterogeneous effects with time, we don't think it's a matter of really or not. Or at least we think the effect is completely encapsulated in the electoral cycle. So what we think is, in the first election, there is not much happening for women, but for men, we actually see that they have these disappointing electoral outcomes, especially these men from parliamentary parties. And so we think there is this learning that stuff are changing, and that the everybody, so the candidates, the parties, etc., adapt to the second election. This would be my answer. On the second question, whether it's a social media effect, whether it's a network effect, whether it's a media effect, what we think, based on the results that I just presented, is that this is driven by the fact that this populations get exposed to this like more gender equal type of content or friendships. So in a sense, we think it's or I think it's both network and media, or at least we cannot know. Okay, we don't have a way to really separate whether it's because you're in contact with people. These people they post, you see what they post, or you see what they repost, and that influences you, or whether this is really media, which is also again within the same framework. I think it's also possible that it is coming from, I don't know if this is what you meant, but like maybe it's exposure to Western media through the fact that I'm connected to these people that are used to consume this Western media, maybe. Our conclusion is that it's driven in part. This is the mechanism that we highlight in the paper. It's driven by exposure to this content for whatever it is that is produced in places with that have different views on the topic, and whether that would, the third question, whether that would apply to other minorities, even though I agree women are not minorities. Good question. So maybe I think it's for another paper. Well, we don't dig into this in this paper, and I think it opens this type of question, like to what extent is it really something that is specific to women. What we show is that this is true for women and for gender norms.
Thank you so much, Sophie. This is such a great presentation, and thank you, Paula, as well, for your nice discussion. So I see that we already have some questions in the chat. So we have a question from Olivia Tsotsopleti, where she asks, did increased connectivity lead to an increase in FLFP? And do you think this is one channel via which your effect operates?
Do you know what FLFP is? I'm sorry.
I think it's female labor force participation.
Female labor force participation. Thank you. That's a very good point. Thank you, Olivia, for the question. It's indeed so. Among the mechanisms that we cannot really track in this paper, and that we leave for future research, there is indeed the possibility that that this is linked to broader or like saying that more generally, I would say that it's possible that it goes with greater capacity of women to become politicians, to campaign, to persuade, both voters and the parties. So we don't know. We don't have really the data to check this. But I think it's one of the mechanisms that is not explored in this paper, and that can actually also explain this effect. Because indeed, I mean, we are focusing more on the demand side in a sense, but of course, I mean, in the explanations, in the mechanisms, but of course, as we see that these women are, that there is this increase in the candidacy, and this increase in candidacy is meaningful in the sense that those female candidates receive the support from these big parties. We believe it's very likely that there is another class of mechanisms that explain our effect, and this class of mechanism is related to everything that helps these women politicians or future politicians to enter this political sphere. And yeah, probably stuff that have to do with female labor participation makes sense. So I don't really have the answer to this, but I agree it's a potential mechanism as well.
And Sophie, one question that I also have regarding the mechanisms is also like about the supply side, because indeed I saw that you focus mainly like on demand side, while there's a lot of papers that show, for example, that how parties they can really prevent women from running, or there are a lot of effects on the supply side as well. And one thing that I was even wondering was that if you would have access, for example, to data regarding either social media of women, on, for example, to whether this increase in social media leads to maybe a more presence of female politicians with like social media profiles, or more advertising, for example, when they do political propaganda and when they're advertising on their campaigns, whether they use more social media or not. And whether this can also, because I mean, so Facebook, for example, they have this the possibility of boosting publications, for example, and I have the impression that like for some type of data this might be available. So maybe if you could develop a bit on that. I mean, if you thought about this mechanism as well. And
I thank you very much, Felipe, for this. It's a super relevant question. So of course, it's very possible that again, I mean, we don't think there is no effect on the on the supply. Actually, we even show that candidate selection is affected. So clearly, there is the supply is at least responding to demand, and so. Yeah, we don't have ways to really track the mechanism that you have in mind, but the very fact that that this, again, we are talking about parliamentary parties. They are selecting. We believe they are selecting. We believe, and the literature says that they are selecting candidates based on their expected popularity. So they have to. Even though they realize that it would be nice to have more female politicians running for the election, they have to have ways to find these women. Okay, so I don't know, but I would expect that indeed, at least for some of these politicians, because also something that I didn't present it today is the fact that the effect that we find on these female candidates running with a parliamentary party are actually driven by new candidates. Okay, so it's female candidates that were not already on the ballot in the previous election. So, I mean, we suspect that social media and access to Facebook and Pre-Basics can also have had an effect through increasing the visibility of these women. I think it also opens very interesting, because from anecdotal evidence we think it's possible. From anecdotal evidence, again, we think it's also possible that this is organized within the parties. So parties, they have groups on Facebook where they promote women, etc., etc. So and I think it's a very interesting avenue for research to understand this, relationship between greater connectivity, the presence of women on those platforms, and also the kind of monitoring role that parties play in this setting. This is really something that we learned from this work. We didn't expect it to see such a big role. Maybe ex post it makes sense, but ex ante for us it was not that clear that we would observe the effects going really through these established parties. So yeah, I would, if I had access to this data, I think I would also pitch a bit the project in a direction that would help us to learn about the role of the monitoring role of the parties in all of this.
Do we have other questions, or are we going to finish on time for once?
Yeah, I think we can. I think we can wrap up because also it's about time.
Okay, perfect. And
Oh,
yeah,
sorry. I
and
guess we
I have
just
to
have
put
one
some
more.
light in my.
So I think we just have one more question, Julia. So maybe if we can just, yeah, answer this before we wrap up. So from Orsan Kasab, was it possible to observe that the filter bubble when female politicians try to reach out to people via Facebook? For example, was the access of female politicians limited mostly to female users and Black African politicians limited to Black users due to how the algorithm works?
So if I understand this question correctly, I think the answer is we are able to detect these effects, that is, this amplifying effects of the structure of the social online network, given what the network is. So whether this network is in part boosted by some aspects of the algorithm, or something, we don't know. It's possible. So we really take the structure of the network as it is, and yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, yeah, and clearly in this context, I don't think we will be able to to go that far. But this is interesting.
Right. So now I guess we can wrap up, Julia. So leave it to you.
No, but thanks a lot to Sophie. Thanks for taking time to present this great work and to answer all the questions. Thanks a lot for Paula for going through the paper and like making this very, very nice discussion. And I guess this will be a completely different work, of course. But the negative social media effect for women, it makes a lot of sense. I guess this is a super interesting questions to look at, even in terms of selecting women into politics, in a sense. If we want to like still work on this electoral aspect. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a lot of what I've been focusing on.
Yeah. Okay, so we should talk more about that. What else should I say? I should give you the date of the next seminar, but we are still looking forward to finding a date. Both Felipe and I know what would be the topic, and you will know more about in a few months, but at least there will be like 2 more seminars before the summer, and perhaps we will try to have 3. Thanks, Felipe, as usual, for organizing this, and thanks, Jamila, and all the team at CEPR. Yeah, and hope to see you soon. And a lot of people just watch the seminar online, so we have all the different series online, and feel free to watch it. Watch this new session. Thanks again. Bye bye.